As Raina settled into her seat at the cozy cafe, she let out a small sigh of relief. It had been a hectic morning, and she was looking forward to the rare opportunity to relax. But her moment of peace was interrupted when she saw a familiar figure walk through the door, Rick. He was heading directly toward her table. Rick and his wife, Louise, had been neighbors to Raina and her husband, Brad, for nearly 4 years. Although Rick and Louise were slightly older, early 40s compared to Raina and Brad's mid-30s, the two couples had forged a strong bond. They had shared countless dinners, backyard barbecues, and even vacations with and without their children. Seeing Rick here, alone and unannounced, was unexpected. "What a surprise," Raina said warmly, though there was a flicker of curiosity in her tone. She glanced over her shoulder as Rick approached. "Shouldn't you be at work?" Rick offered a small smile and slid into the seat across from her. "I could ask you the same thing," he replied evenly. "I took the afternoon off to handle some personal matters. I assume you did the same." Raina nodded, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's been a busy morning. I just needed a little time to recharge." She hesitated and added, "I didn't know you liked cafes like this." "I don't," Rick admitted, holding her gaze for a beat longer than she was comfortable with. "Honestly, I saw you walk in and decided to join you. We need to talk." Raina's heart quickened. She leaned forward slightly, her voice tinged with concern. "Is something wrong?" "I hope nothing happened to Louise." Rick shook his head and lowered his gaze briefly before offering her a reassuring smile. "No, Louise is fine. Thank you for asking." He paused, his expression softening. "You and Brad have become very important to us. We consider you family. And because of that, I felt I couldn't ignore this." "This?" Raina asked, her voice unsteady. "What do you mean?" Rick hesitated, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. "I've been debating whether to bring this up," he confessed, his tone measured. "But I think it's something you need to hear." "Rick, you're scaring me," Raina murmured, her palms damp against the table's surface. He took a deep breath, leaning forward. "Have you been intimate with him yet?" The question hit Raina like a thunderclap. Her cheeks flushed crimson and her breath caught in her throat. "What?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know who you're talking about." Rick's gaze didn't waver. "The man you keep glancing at through the door," he said calmly, his tone devoid of accusation but heavy with meaning. "Did you, or did you not sleep with him?" "No, not at all," Raina blurted, her voice rising slightly. She crossed her arms defensively, her skin prickling with discomfort. "I don't know what you're implying, Rick, but you're wrong." Rick held up a hand, his expression softening. "I'm not here to judge you," he said gently. He placed his hand over hers, a gesture that felt both comforting and paternal. "I just need you to listen. I want to explain what's really going on, what you might think is happening, and, more importantly, what he thinks about it." Raina's pulse thundered in her ears. She nodded mutely, unsure whether she wanted to hear more, but unable to stop him. Rick's voice dropped, becoming almost a whisper. "He's charming, isn't he? Younger, maybe, or more successful than Brad. He listens when you talk. Really listens. He knows how to make you feel seen, appreciated. He offers compliments when you're feeling low, and makes you feel special in ways Brad might not anymore. He's always there when you need someone, ready to sacrifice his time for you. Does that sound about right?" Raina's body went rigid, her mind racing to keep up with his words. "How do you know this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Does Brad suspect something?" Rick nodded slowly. "Of course he does. He's your husband. He knows you better than anyone else. He doesn't have proof, but suspicions are enough to eat away at him. And I can tell you, it's breaking his heart." Tears pricked at Raina's eyes as she shook her head. "Nothing has happened between us," she insisted, her voice cracking. "We're just friends." Rick leaned back slightly, watching her intently. "Let me tell you what's been happening, Raina. 2 very important things happened recently. Things you missed because of this friendship. Mr. Charming needed you, didn't he? And you felt obligated to be there for him. But in doing so, you missed your son's birthday and your 9th anniversary dinner with Brad. Raina's chest tightened, guilt flooding through her. I didn't mean, she began, but Rick cut her off gently. I'm not here to point fingers, he said. I just want you to think about where this road leads. You may believe it's innocent, but the lines have blurred. It's not just about you. It's about Brad, your son, and the life you've built. That's what's at stake. Raina swallowed hard, her world tilting under the weight of his words. What had she done? And, more importantly, how could she make it right? You keep this hidden from your husband, Rick began, his tone calm but resolute, because deep down you know he wouldn't understand. Raina's breath caught in her throat, her mind racing as Rick continued, his words deliberate and cutting. This friend of yours, Rick said, emphasizing the word, he wants to know everything about your husband, doesn't he? And you've told him, shared every little intimate detail. You wouldn't dream of confiding in me or Brad. And why wouldn't he support you? He's happily fueling your narrative that Brad is the problem, that it's all Brad's fault when things go wrong. I bet even Brad's suspicions have been twisted into proof of what a terrible husband he is. Raina's jaw dropped, the color draining from her face. How do you know all this? She whispered, her voice trembling. Rick nodded knowingly, his expression serious. Let's cut to the chase, Raina. Was it the day you missed your son's birthday? Or was it the anniversary dinner? When Brad kissed you and told you how much he loves you, that made you turn to him? When did it happen? Raina's hand shook as she lowered her gaze. It was the night I missed our anniversary, she murmured. But it wasn't like that. He was grieving the loss of an old friend. And it just happened. Her voice cracked, barely audible. But I stopped it right away. Rick's gaze softened, though his tone remained unyielding. Stopped it? Maybe. But let's be honest here. Your defensive behavior, the fact that you're sitting here now, waiting for him, this isn't just about a kiss. It's gone further, hasn't it? Raina's silence betrayed her guilt. No sex, Rick continued, his words steady, but enough that if the tables were turned, if you caught Brad doing the same, you'd call it cheating. Am I wrong? Tears welled in Raina's eyes as she shook her head. You feel guilty, don't you? Rick pressed on. Because a part of you knows you're to blame. Brad isn't the husband you want, and this so-called friend of yours has been all too willing to fill in the gaps. Sure, you've convinced yourself nothing's happened. But deep down you know better. And a part of you is praying Brad never finds out. Raina's voice broke as she asked, Are you going to tell him? Rick leaned forward, his gaze unrelenting. So you're admitting I'm right? You're admitting what I already know. He tilted his head, watching her closely. You slept with him, didn't you? The room seemed to hold its breath as Raina finally nodded, tears spilling freely now. I tried to stop it, she confessed, her voice trembling. We didn't go all the way, but we were close. I was angry, I was drunk, and Brad was just being so stupid. Her voice cracked again. I made a mistake. Rick sighed heavily, leaning back in his chair as he studied her tear-streaked face. Exactly as I thought, he said softly. You've proven Brad right, Raina. She wiped at her cheeks, her voice barely a whisper. No, I'm not telling him anything. He'll figure it out on his own, eventually. Rick's expression hardened. Fine, but let's talk about what's really happening here. His voice dropped, low and steady, as he continued. Your charming friend, this man you've let into your life. He sees you. A woman distracted, vulnerable, easy to manipulate. Raina flinched, the words slicing through her. Don't interrupt me, Rick warned gently, raising a hand to calm her. This isn't his first time, Raina. He knows exactly what he's doing. You think it's about you, that he's captivated by you. But you're wrong. It's not about you, it's about Brad. Her heart pounded in her chest. No, she protested weakly. He doesn't want to hurt Brad. I'm sure of it. Rick shook his head, his voice heavy with certainty. It's a game, Raina. He thrives on taking from others, on watching people like Brad crumble. And you played right into his hands. Raina sat frozen, her thoughts a whirlwind as Rick's words cut through her defenses. His tone was calm but unyielding, each statement peeling away the layers of denial she'd wrapped herself in. He's playing you, Rick said firmly, his eyes locked on hers. Every move Mr. Charming has made has been calculated. He's been working to undermine your marriage, to make you feel insecure, and to convince you that he matters more than Brad ever could. Think about it, Raina. He made sure you missed 2 events that meant the world to your husband. The death of his friend and that so-called crisis just happened to fall on those exact days, didn't they? Coincidence? Not a chance. Raina shuddered, guilt rising like a tidal wave. Brad's birthday is in 3 weeks, she whispered. I won't let this happen again. Rick raised an eyebrow, his expression sharp. Won't let it happen? Raina, you were in that man's arms while Brad sat waiting for you at a restaurant, alone, for an hour. You didn't even bother to come up with a convincing excuse. A friend with food poisoning? You didn't even use a real name. Her cheeks flushed, and she looked down ashamed. Rick continued, his voice steady but relentless. And now, here you are, skipping work just because Mr. Charming snapped his fingers. You've made it very clear where your priorities lie, and it's not in your marriage. Raina's breath caught. But he wants me. He's different. He doesn't want Brad to know about us. Rick laughed quietly, but there was no humor in it. Of course he doesn't. He already knows everything about Brad, every little detail you've shared with him, and he's using it. He's feeding Brad suspicions, manipulating you to doubt your own decisions, and widening the gap between you two. He needs that rift. It's part of the game. Once he's got you completely, once he feels like he's won, that's when he'll make sure Brad finds out. And trust me, it won't be the truth he tells. Raina's eyes widened in horror. How do you know all this? Rick gave a faint, bitter smile. Because I've been where Mr. Charming is. Before my wife, Louise, and I built the life we have now, I knew how to play these games. I know the tactics, the lies, and the destruction they cause. You've got 2 choices, Raina. Keep lying to yourself and watch the spiral into something you can't control, or stop now. Face the truth, and try to salvage what's left of your marriage. Her chest tightened as tears welled up. I don't want Brad to find out, she murmured, her voice breaking. Rick sighed, his eyes softening just slightly. If you keep this up, you won't have a choice. Mr. Charming will make sure Brad finds out, and he'll twist the narrative to suit himself. You need to stop this before it's too late. Tears streamed down her face. I can't let him know. Rick stepped closer and gently pulled her into a brief hug. His voice dropped to a whisper. Then don't give him a reason. Don't let it go any further. Not a touch, not a word, not even a glance that you wouldn't want Brad to see. Trust me, if you cross that line, the fallout will destroy you both. As he stepped back, a voice cut through the tension. Is that man bothering you? Rick turned to see a tall, slender man with a thick beard standing a few feet away. You must be Reed, Rick said, his tone as calm as his eyes were cold. He extended a hand, which Reed hesitated to take. When Reed finally accepted, Rick's grip tightened like a vice. He leaned in, his voice low and threatening. Listen to me. If you make a scene or try anything stupid, you'll regret it. Stay away from Raina. Don't talk to her. Don't even think about her. Or I'll make sure this ends in a way you won't like. Reed winced, his confidence evaporating as Rick released his hand. Who the hell do you think you are? He muttered, rubbing his fingers. Rick leaned in closer, his voice razor sharp. I'm the man who's giving you a warning. You've already stuck your hand in the cookie jar. Don't be foolish enough to lose it over something that isn't worth it. Reed's bravado faltered, and he mumbled under his breath, No, she's not worth it. Definitely not. Rick straightened, his gaze like steel as he turned back to Raina. This is your second chance, he said bluntly. Go home. Be the wife Brad deserves. It won't be easy, but tell him the truth. Admit that he had every reason to suspect something, but that you stopped before it got worse. Leave me out of it. It's better that way. He'll be angry, but he'll respect the honesty. And trust me, he'll want to move forward. Raina wiped her eyes, trembling. Thank you, she whispered. Rick's expression softened for the first time. I didn't do it for you, Raina. I did it for Brad, and to make up for my own mistakes. He paused, his voice gentler now. Take care of him. He deserves better than what you've been giving. Raina nodded, her tears falling freely as Rick turned and walked away, leaving her to face the choices ahead.